In August of 2019, Darren and I had the incredible experience of traveling to Southern Africa for our first international trip. After our journey of over 40 hours in transit, we arrived in Windhoek, the capital of Namibia. Once our tour started, things went smoothly despite our initial transport delays. Thanks, Air Canada. What we thought was a group tour turned out to be a private tour with our guide and a small 4x4 truck. We were impressed by the great conditions of the highways, but most of our driving was actually on dirt roads through the desert. Throughout all of Africa, we saw many farm animals. Cows and goats were the most common. In many areas, there were no fences, and even when there were fences, the animals were outside of the fences and would cross the road in herds. We often wondered what the animals were eating. Our guide told us grass. As you will see, there was not much grass, so the animals had to wander quite a distance while grazing. Interestingly, a lot of beef from Africa is exported to European countries as free-range meat. In areas, we were able to see the environmental impact that farming has on the environment. Despite the rather barren landscape of the desert, we did see a surprising amount of wildlife there. Here we see some oryx and mountain zebra. Of the several species of antelope living in southern Africa, the two most common in the desert were the oryx and the smaller springbok. We drove through the mountains on a cobblestone road. There were no guardrails down the winding mountain. We stopped and looked at this magnificent view from the lookout. Throughout this whole area, there were no locals living here, only occasional desert camps. The temperature on this day was not very high, probably about 20 degrees Celsius, but it was also quite windy, so it did not feel very warm. I think I put my jacket back on after this photo. This is a small baobab tree. It is one of the larger species of trees that grow in the desert. There are not many trees in the desert, and most do not grow very large. During our desert safari, we stayed at an eco-camp. Outside of our tent, there was a man-made watering hole where the animals congregated. Here you see two desert foxes getting a drink. They may look similar to coyotes, but they were about the size of a red fox. This oryx was not bothered by the nearby foxes. Our tent was built on wooden stilts with canvas sides and a wood structure roof. This was a common type of accommodation throughout our travels. At the eco camp, the eating area was outside, which was nice. However, it gets quite cold at night, down to about 10 degrees Celsius. We learned quickly that you cannot shower late at night or in the morning. The temperature in the tent is the same as outdoors, and the water is heated by solar panels, so it cools off overnight. On our first day, we were very lucky to witness a mob of meerkats run across the road and stop along the side where they had burrows. There was a large bird circling overhead, so they were hiding. Most of the group ran off, but these two decided to go into their burrow. Our guide told us that it was the first meerkat sighting he had in over 5 years. These mountain zebras were far off in the distance on the side of the mountain, and our guide pointed them out. The photo is cropped, but was already at 400mm zoom. We were impressed that he was able to spot these animals. Mountain zebra looks slightly different than regular zebra, which we saw in Zimbabwe and Botswana. They have white bellies. Their stripes do not go all the way around. We were lucky to be able to get closer to them later on, but they are quite shy and were often moving away from us. The springbok was the smaller of the types of antelope that we saw in Namibia. We even had the opportunity to try the game meat as it was served to us for dinner at the lodge. One night we had springbok and the other night we tried oryx. They were both grilled and taste similar to other game meats. Namibia is known for having wild horses. Interestingly, the origins of these horses are not known, or at least agreed upon. Some people believe they belonged to the South African military and escaped during a bombing, while others believe they escaped from a farm, all during the early 1900s. We also saw ostriches along the side of the road. The males have black feathers while the females have slightly lighter feathers. Note that these birds are actually quite smart and they do not bury their heads in the sand. They have to bend quite low to the ground to eat the plants, and they also store their eggs in the ground. The desert was a great place to watch the sunset. On our drive from Windhoek through the Namib Desert, we stopped for lunch in Solitaire. We tried some of the famous German apple pie from the restaurant, which was excellent. Against all advice, I tried the milk. I had a choice of warm or cold. I went with the cold, and it was certainly different than what I was used to, as it had a consistency closer to cream. This tiny settlement had a gas station and a restaurant decorated with several old vehicles. When vehicles break down, people just leave them along the side of the highway. For the most part, the vehicles do get removed, but by other people who take the parts. On the second day of our tour, we headed out before sunrise to get to Sossusvlei just as the park opened. We drove for miles, surrounded by dunes on both sides of the road. The first and largest dune pictured here is Dune 7. This dune is several kilometers from the road, so very few people venture to it, as vehicles are not permitted off the road. The sand from these dunes in the Namib Desert actually originated in the Kalahari Desert millions of years ago and moved into the Namib Desert with the water, which you can see is no longer there. The dune closest to the road is Dune 45. We climbed this dune. It was a bit of a workout, but it took us less than an hour, and the views from the top were amazing. Throughout the trip, we saw many of these giant nests in the trees. They are sociable weaver nests. These birds, pictured here, live in colonies. Hundreds of birds can live in these structures. They are generally built on trees, but we also saw several telephone poles encompassed by these nests. Here you can see Darren standing by a large nest. We were advised not to stand under the nests, as cobras often enter the nest to eat the baby birds or eggs and will drop out if they feel vibration under the nests. Some other animals that we saw in the desert included the African pigeon and a small lizard who was burrowing in the sand. Although trees were somewhat rare in the desert, the acacia tree was the most common, and often animals would be resting in its shade. We were impressed to see that this truck had traveled all the way from Washington State. Check out their website, they are driving all the way around the world. This monument in the park recognizes the Namib Sand Sea as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. One of the highlights of this trip was our visit to Deadvlei, a white clay pan characterized by the dark, dead camel thorn trees. The trees are estimated to be over 900 years old, but they have not decomposed because of the dry climate. The white pan and the dark trees create a beautiful contrast against the red sand and blue sky. Behind the pan, the two dunes you see are known as Big Daddy and Big Mama. These dunes are also very popular for people to climb. The last destination on our desert tour was Sesreim Canyon. The canyon was shaped by the Chushab River over millions of years and is one of the few places that holds water all year round. We visited during the winter, the dry season, but we were lucky enough to see the small pool of water that remained. Water will still run through the canyon after good rains, but it has been several years since this region has had significant rains during the rainy season. Thanks so much to our wonderful guide Willem for providing us with a great tour. Stay tuned for our next video, which will take you to Zimbabwe.